Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Carol Jenkins, and this is Black America. Today's conversation, the Black vote in the 2022 midterm election, as we record this just days away. Joining me to talk about this is Errol Lewis, host of Inside City Hall on New York One, a preeminent political news show in New York City. He is also adjunct professor at CUNY's Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism and host of the You Decide with Errol Lewis, one of my favorite podcasts. He was a moderator of the recent New York State gubernatorial debate. And also with us today is Dr. Basil Smikle, Jr., distinguished lecturer and director of the Public Policy Program at Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute, which is a part of our family of CUNY's Hunter College. In a previous life, he was executive director of the New York State Democratic Party and a senior aide to Senator Hillary Clinton. Thank you both so much. To say that you two know what you're talking about. You have been there, through many an event, many an election. Basil, we were talking earlier. You and I were sharing our 2016 Javits Center experience, that nightmare when Hillary Clinton, what it seemed, had lost that election, and I refused to leave Javits Center. And I think I was the last one out, but you said that you were
probably right before you.
that you were. I couldn't believe it,
Right.
And I'm in another moment like that. I can't believe it. Right. Tell us what you think is happening this year.
Well, I still have my tear-stained jacket from that night as a memorial to, defeated expectations in many ways. And in some respects, that moment mirrors today. I feel very nervous about what's coming. The Supreme Court is debating affirmative action as we speak. And many of the, as a child who grew up here in New York and in the Bronx, many of the things that I learned in school, learned from my elders, believed was how government worked, so much has changed in the last few years. And I think so much of that is now on the ballot. And so when I think about this upcoming election, when I think about what's at stake for the people that I care deeply about, I am nervous because I want everyone to sort of take it as seriously as I do, not just think in the moment, but think for the future, which is sometimes very difficult for folks to do, but it's important in this moment.
Errol, are you similarly worried about what's happening on November 8th?
I tend to look at patterns. I don't do predictions, but I do patterns. And look, the truth is the party in power, meaning whoever controls, the party that controls the White House, in the 19 midterms that we've had since the end of World War II, the president's party almost always loses seats. In fact, they lose an average of 26 seats in the midterms. So those who like what's happening with Joe Biden and with the Democrats in control of Congress, they should be ready and they should not be shocked if we go to the normal pattern. And the normal pattern is that the Democrats are about to lose a couple of dozen seats in the House of Representatives, and with it, control of the House and control of legislation.
Well, the Republicans only need 5 of
that
those
is correct.
25 that you're expecting.
Exactly. So even if they halfway perform, even if the Democrats break with history and somehow only lose 10 seats, they'll still lose control. So people should be ready for that. And I find it helpful to look at history as well from the point of view of there have been much worse seasons. It is very disappointing to see the overturning of Roe versus Wade. It is alarming to see the concealed carry law in New York struck down. But there have been other seasons in history in which really important rights were tampered with or taken away or eviscerated. And then there have been great seasons when we take steps forward, where things like the Miranda rights, come into play, or legal segregation is struck down. And so, I feel you have to understand politics in that broadest sense as something that plays out not one election at a time, but one season at a time. And those seasons can last 20, 30, 40 years.
Or in this case, forever, because what concerns me is that what is different about this is that you actually have a so-called party the Republican Party that is full of people who deny the results of the last election are seemingly essentially operating on the politics of cruelty, is the way I see it. I don't know that there will be more voting, more democratic votes, coming up if they indeed do, because the first thing that they have promised that they're going to do is impeach President Biden, Nancy Pelosi, even after this vicious attack on her husband. I don't know, Basil. Do you? I get it's a seasonal thing, but to me this somehow feels a little bit different, a little more dangerous.
Well, I think one of the reasons that a lot of folks feel that it's more dangerous is because it's hard to see how we work our way out of it. I think Errol's absolutely right. A lot of this does come in seasons. Democrats should be concerned and prepared. And I think one of the things that has always concerned me as a Democrat, and having run the party, I saw this from a different space. Republicans generally do this on a 20-year plan, as opposed to the cycle by cycle that Democrats seem to plan ahead. But the Republicans have a 20, 30-year plan. When you think about the fact that under Obama, Democrats lost 1,000 state legislative seats. And why is that important? Because they planned at some point, whether it was an intentional plan or something serendipitous, but they believed that ultimately we wanted states to decide a lot of these policies, take it out of the national realm. Having said that, you add to that the fact that they're predicting and moving judges in a certain way, in a certain direction, right? Under Trump, the appellate courts were flipped from Democrat to Republican control, generally speaking. And then, of course, the Supreme Court, which is now changed for a generation. And so this is part of sort of a larger plan, larger strategy, larger conversation. And I think one of the challenges for a voter that cares about a lot of these issues is how now do we work our way out of this in a short period of time or even a long period of time? It's 20 to 30 years that we're going to see major policy changes because the infrastructure is set up such that change is now institutionalized.
Supreme Court, right?
It's
institutionalized.
institutionalized.
Exactly, from the Supreme Court on down. Although I'm not sure that we put the Supreme Court up at that level anymore. From the Supreme Court so let's talk about the black vote. Usually, the way this election is framed is losing the House, holding on to the Senate maybe, or losing the Senate in that regard. But this time we're really talking about people who are election deniers and people who are trying to follow the old democratic process. And we're also doing it in a hate-filled environment. So when we look at that, what are the issues that we're talking about? So what do you think the issues are for the black population? And we are, 32 million people, will be 13% of this vote.
Sure.
Next week.
There are a host of issues, and there's the big three, right? There's always the economy, and there's criminal justice, and there's health. There's the basics that sustain a life, the life of a family or of a community. Those are all at stake for sure. What is really singular about what's happening right now is I would characterize some of what is happening. You mentioned cruelty. Some of this is born of a backlash. The Obama presidency has a sort of a blast radius. It transformed American politics in ways that I think a lot of Obama supporters don't necessarily even recognize, which is it spurred an enormous backlash. I would argue, in fact, Donald Trump is in fact a reaction to the Obama presidency. Trumpism, in some ways, is a reaction to the movement that lifted Obama to the White House. And so what we see with the black vote is the first and most pressing issue is whether or not we will continue to have a black vote, meaning the various different attacks or changes or tampering with early voting sites, voter ID rules, on and on and on, all across the Bible Belt or the Cotton Belt or however you want to characterize it, the old Confederacy. That is a direct reaction.
That's a good way of thinking about it, the old Confederacy.
That's the only way I think. That's the way I think of it. You look at it, and
right.
And it is a very conscious, and you can find it in court records and in public statements, a very conscious effort to try and bring down the level of participation that led to the election of Obama. And so you see elaborate gerrymandering schemes, voter suppression allegations, all kinds of litigation, the weakening of the Voting Rights Act, all of a piece. And it's intended to discourage or limit the impact of the black vote. That's, to me, the very first thing that has to be addressed.
And I'll just add very quickly, that's why moving to the state legislatures was so important for Republicans that cared about this. Because while the Constitution sets some guidelines for voting, a lot of that is state level politics. And one of the things that we learned in this Trump era, we got a great lesson in civics. We learned who at the state level actually is in charge of the voting processes. And some of those individuals, secretaries of state, are actually elected in our country. And guess what? There are a lot of those folks were endorsed by Trump for a very specific reason, right? To exactly as Errol said, to tamp down that black vote.
Now, I always say that, we thought that we had, before the Trump presidency, we thought that there were certain rules and regulations that were written down somewhere. We didn't know where, but apparently they weren't. They were just, people following tradition and the way a democracy had worked in the past. I want to talk about black women and black men voters particularly. So the black women are traditionally, first of all, black voters, 85% members of the Democratic Party, as of the most recent tabulations, 85%. So, and the Republican Party is essentially a white party, The black women who gave us the U.S. Senate, gave the Democrats the U.S. Senate, what do they have to show for that? Everybody's been saying yes. Even the president says, I wouldn't be here if it were not for black women in Georgia who gave us the vote and the Senate and all of that. We've got the Supreme Court justice. We have a black vice president. But what we don't have is any substantial improvement in the lives of black women in this country. Black maternal health. We're still at the bottom of the economic wage. So what do you assess the black woman vote to be in this election? Still enthusiastic? Still?
Well, dutifully, I think, engaged for sure, and let's not downplay. You mentioned, they gave us a vice president.
Remember when that was a big thing? Are you kidding me?
First woman in history. It's a pretty big deal.
It's a big thing.
It's a pretty big deal.
Definitely.
Ketanji Brown Jackson, hopefully, will be there for another generation.
Excellent.
A very big deal. A very big deal. But look, when it comes to the policies that matter, black maternal health. Student debt, a big overhang on so many families.
Right.
The basic level of participation in wage equity, the core democratic issues. Has the party done a good enough job of pressing those forward? I'm not so sure about that. The narrative, the thread has been lost in a lot of respects, where if you were to ask any given voter going into this midterm, well, what are the top issues? None of what I just described would make that list, and that is a problem.
And I think the intersectionality in all things that affect white women is not being discussed with respect to black women. It's particularly things like reproductive rights. It's an economic issue as well as a healthcare issue, and how that certainly affects African American women differently from white women. And if you think about the thread of the cycles over the last few years, and particularly in this cycle, there's all of this conversation about going after white suburban women, whereas black women in the Democratic Party have essentially upheld the party for a generation. And so the question is, where is the political engagement of African American women on very specific issues that affect them in our communities? And you just don't see it. What you do see is what you have always seen, which is essentially an attempt to co-opt, right? An attempt to bring African American women into sort of a larger movement of women without really paying attention to those very specific needs. And I think we're at a place where the African American community, men and women, are saying, listen, if you're gonna make me a part of this, you've gotta really be attentive to our needs. And if they're not seeing it, they may stay home.
Right, exactly. And speaking of staying home, there are some thoughts that black men may be staying home. That they, in some of the interviews that are being conducted, they feel that they are not, the messages are not there for them. Their improvement is not there. And, and there is also what we think is a reluctance to support women candidates, perhaps. Is that, So talk to me about that. I mean, I'm looking at you with the evil eye. Both of you are good guys.
Well, I mean, the way the party politics is played out, and I think I understand what you're getting at, which is that if black women are so critical and are the most faithful voters and are the base of the Democratic Party, the base of the base, somebody like Sherry Beasley in North Carolina, Val Demings in Florida, Stacey Abrams in Georgia should be at the top of the list as far as priorities for the national party. To make sure that those races get all of the resources and attention and support that the party can muster. That hasn't necessarily been the case, especially in North Carolina. I mean, Sherry Beasley, former Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, now running for Senate. Under any other metric, you'd say, this is a winner.
That's right.
This is somebody who's already sort of served the state, known throughout the state, good name recognition, squeaky clean background that's been officially vetted, because you don't serve as a judge without people looking into your background. And has she appeared with Joe Biden? Has she been talked about on the national circuit? Are there a bunch of surrogates flooding that state? I'm not aware of it.
That's right.
Yeah, but Barack Obama was there. I mean, and he is making the circuit. And amazingly energetic. I said he's really preaching, the way the old Obama used to preach. I think, he scares me a little bit because I get the feeling that he's as afraid as the rest of us, that something terrible is about to happen. So let's talk a little. Let's go through some. Let's start with Georgia. I know the Sherry Beasley. I mean, she is fantastic. My granddaughters and I were phone banking for her, and we had. We found a lot of people who were going out to vote for her the next day. But this one Southern woman, and I'm from Alabama, I loved it. She heard my granddaughter's voices and she just said, "Thank you, baby, so much. Yes, I'm definitely voting." And I'm voting for Sherry Beasley. But in Georgia, for instance, where we've got Stacey Abrams once again trying to unseat Brian Kemp. Talk a little bit about what you think. There are some who believe that it's the black vote in Georgia that may hold Stacey Abrams back, the black male vote. Women, of course, will support her. What do you hear about Stacey? And
some of the polling that I've seen, and a lot of the some of the anecdotes that I've heard coming out of Georgia is yes, a lot of African American men are not coming out in strong numbers for her, which is problematic. It's problematic because that is our party. Not only is it the current Democratic Party, she is the future of our party, as is Sherry and others. Right. One of the things that one of the things that I look at, obviously she lost her race 4 years ago by a slim margin. She's been preparing, and had been talking to her. She's been going to rural parts of Georgia. She's been talking to white farmers and black farmers. She has been preparing for this race for 4 years, but so has Kemp. And so one of the things that we think about, and going back to earlier parts of our conversation, Kemp was in charge of elections in Georgia. They know exactly what they're doing in terms of how and where to tamp down votes, right? But we are seeing good voter turnout in early voting there. And we hope that propels Stacey. One of the things that I'm looking at also is the extent to which the Warnock election actually helps propel Stacey. We hear a lot about ticket splitting. It doesn't happen as much as we think, but maybe we've got to figure out whether folks are more focused on the Senate because of reproductive rights, for example, and may do Warnock-Kemp. So that's something that I think the party there has to be mindful of, to just make sure that ticket stays intact.
So Stacey Abrams is running against Brian Kemp. Raphael Warnock is running against Herschel Walker. Now, gentlemen, talk to me about Herschel Walker.
It's an almost perfect political science experiment to the extent that you have one candidate who is learned and fluent and erudite and experienced And the other who's the opposite of all of those things. Can't put a couple of sentences together, no government experience whatsoever, and scarred with all kinds of scandalous allegations that have, trailed behind him like cans tied to a car. And yet, it's not only neck and neck, but it looks like a gap that the polls revealed had opened up when some of the allegations of having forced girlfriends to get abortions came. A gap that had opened up and given an advantage to Warnock now appears to have closed. It is purely partisan politics. Herschel Walker, by almost any definition, is simply not fit to serve in the Senate. And the fact that he is close to winning and could, in fact, win tells you that some people are just voting strictly along party lines, not at all related to the qualifications of the candidate.
Incredible. Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin, again, running against Senator Ron Johnson. He's the lieutenant governor, has won statewide office. What's your read? Is he going to survive?
He's been a great candidate, but the recent polling looks like that he's starting to fall behind, and that's going to be concerning. But he's been a tremendous candidate, and Wisconsin is a state that Democrats should actually do pretty well in. But he's having a tough time. And I'll just say this, and to tie it to the point about Herschel Walker and Warnock. Republicans in many ways vote like they're voting in parliamentary elections, and it's important to remember that. It's the quality of the candidate is sort of irrelevant. It's the agenda that they're electing these people to go fulfill, and that's what we're up against.
That's what we're.
Yeah. Well, and it's true, and and a variation on that is what you see when you realize that people are hurting because of inflation. Yep. People are worried about crime. And in that case, there's a somewhat rational response from voters where they say, whoever's in charge, let's just throw them out. Let's just go in a different direction. That's how you end up with this phenomenon of Obama-Trump voters. If your life's not going well under George Bush and the Republicans, you say, you know what, I'm going to go in a different direction. This is how Obama wins, in part. Yeah. 8 years later, life's not going so well. You just say, well, I'll go in a different direction. Let's try Donald Trump. That level of almost superficial decision-making by voters is well documented in the literature.
That's right.
And the reality is, and this has held true for decades. Well, he's a professor. He knows these things. Is that most Americans don't know who their member of Congress is.
That's true.
They just don't. That's very true. And frankly, they don't have to.
But they hate Congress.
Right.
They hate the institutions, but if they know who their Congress member is, they love that person. But they hate Congress itself.
And
Speaking of Congress, I want to get to Val Demings, though, in Florida, running against Marco Rubio. I love her. I've been in several rooms with her where she's told her story. I'm the daughter of a janitor and a maid, and and I'm a former police chief. She comes with such high credentials in a state like Florida. There shouldn't be any question, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the vote. But yet it's close, and we're not sure that she's going to make it either.
Val, to me, first of all, it's Florida, so it's Florida, and who knows what happens there. But Val Demings, to me, is an example of what's wrong in this cycle, because she is an extraordinary candidate, former law enforcement, right? But yet Democrats are losing the argument on crime and criminal justice. How is that possible? Right? When we talked a lot about reproductive rights, absolutely right. We should have done that. It would have been malpractice not to. But then we should be pivoting to a lot of those other issues, like economic issues and crime and criminal justice. Here is a person who was a former sheriff, I believe, right, who can talk about these issues in an extraordinarily articulate fashion, and a persuasive one. And we're not tapping her. And I'm not saying that Eric Adams, our fair mayor, is necessarily the face of the future Democratic Party, which he says he was, but he won as a black Democrat talking about crime. Why aren't we nationally able to do that?
No, that's right. In this cycle, you have Val Demings, and I keep wanting to see more photos of her from her days as chief of police of Orlando.
Or her riding her motorcycle, I think, too.
Yeah. That's right, her Harley. That's exactly right.
In this same cycle, we have Letitia James in New York, who's the Attorney General. Right. They should be national figures if the Democrats wanted to push back on this allegation of being soft on crime. They have more than enough of a background, of not only a reputation, but a solid sort of policy background. and they should be, in part, the face of the Democratic Party. It would be one way to answer these allegations of being soft on crime. The party has not decided to do that.
Well, I am hoping that the women of America save this election, because what we were talking about for so long was reproductive rights and the right to abortion and the striking down of a 50-year precedent. And that should be a motivator for people voting, So I'm a little, I want to talk about that, not so much these other issues, and remember that reproductive rights are economic rights. We're talking about how do you feed, how do you support a family, that has I wouldn't say too many children, but has more children than can be, supported. So your quick words, we have a minute or so left in terms of what the Black citizenry should be looking at after November 8th. What do we do?
What do we do is, if at no other time, I think we as a community need to have as they say, a come to Jesus moment.
Right, come to Jesus. You're in the right place.
This come to Jesus moment, and start thinking about long term. How do we force our elected leaders to set our agenda? Not necessarily a broader one, because if you can speak to every other community about their needs, why do you lump us in with everybody else? And that's
And just like your health life, your spiritual life, it's the habits that matter. The goal is nice to think about, but you don't want to necessarily get distracted from the day-by-day creation of habits. Always register, more people, always vote, always educate your kids, always plan for the future, always prepare for the next election. Those are just good habits. And once you get the habits in place and you create a political culture, where they seem to be doing that in some parts of the country. They're breaking all kinds of records in Georgia for early voting.
For voting, and I voted early. I was the first one in line, and I got a bracelet. My other friends are complaining they only got stickers. I got a bracelet. I want to thank you both so much. I want you to come back after the election so we can review what actually happened to this country. That is it for us at this time. I want to thank my guests, Errol Lewis, host of Inside City Hall, and Dr. Basil Smikle, director of the Public Policy Program at CUNY's Roosevelt House Institute. Both of you for joining us and sharing your insights. We will see you the next time. Remember, Election Day is November 8th. There's still time to phone bank, to make a plan. You can visit vote.gov to find polling sites and more. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. We'll see you soon.